Hello and welcome to Alive and Composing the Wonderful World of Inova with today's guest, Mason Bates. Would you please state your name for the record?
I'm Mason Bates, a composer. I also DJ. I'm interested in symphonic music, electronica, and chamber music.
Wait a minute, I thought you were the butler for Downton Abbey. Oh, cut the tape!
I just discovered today that there's a Mason Bates who's an 11-year-old English go-kart star, so check him out.
We live in a world of multiple personalities here, but we're going to dig deep into your mind and psyche as a composer while we listen to your music and figure out why it is you do what you do. And the first question, as part of our longitudinal study into composers and their household pets, do you have a lifestyle that allows you to have a pet?
Not really. I have 2 children. They're going to be the pets for the time being. We do have a fair amount of space where an animal could run around, but at this point in time, with 2 working parents and 2 young children, I cannot possibly take on any more living things in my life.
Cast your mind back to more or less their age, and what is your earliest sound memory? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the soundscape of your babyhood?
My father played a lot of 30s swing records, like big band, vinyl, very reverberous, low bass kind of emanating from the study, his man cave. And I never really thought it would be something that impacted me, but it's certainly jazz, harmony, and particularly that kind of jazz has shown itself in my music.
And the low bass, do you have the subwoofer fetish?
I've become quite requiring of stereo subwoofers in particular pieces. It really is the thing that you need when you have a couple thousand people at a symphonic concert. You need to have something bigger than a 15-inch woofer on your JBLs.
While the musicians are wearing earplugs?
Well, it's funny, the subwoofer is actually not really the loudest part of the equation. Usually that is going to be in the upper frequencies. The subwoofer just gives you that nice gut feel. But yeah, they see something as big as a refrigerator that's going to be making noise, and they ultimately will mellow out, but at first they get very nervous. Once they hear the piece, they realize that I'm trying to integrate it and not completely blow them out of the water.
Is there something visceral about art forms that you've loved ever since? Do you like to have that kind of sense of vibration going on in your life, or?
Yeah, it's certainly one of the most interesting things about music as an art form is that it inhabits both an abstract and a very visceral realm, and it is really in the kind of negotiation between those 2 realms that I think some of the greatest music happens. So I've always liked it when a piece can really, make you feel something in your gut. On the other hand, it can't only do that. You'd certainly want to have something that engages your intellect as well.
Can you give a couple of examples of those kinds of pieces that maybe changed your life, or what were aha moments for you?
Well, I mean, some of the pieces that I early on thought, I never would have thought Gershwin would be somebody I'd point to, but his music has a very visceral sense, not just the rhythms that you hear out of the percussion section, but the harmonies. Jazz harmony is really, I think, the furthest you can go in harmony in terms of the theory involved and actually still feel it. So I think, in his also, that's the gut kind of visceral stuff, but the way he brought these 2 different kinds of music together has been inspiring to me as I've been integrating electronic into the orchestra. Also a lot of English psychedelic rock. Pink Floyd, those guys were masters of things that are kind of tugging at your darkest depths of intellect while also being, fully engaging with the body. Literally they'll have in some of the concerts, spatial stuff. So that's been phenomenal on more within the field. I've loved people as diverse as, say, John Corigliano, who's got, in a sense, very kind of abstract type forms that are inhabited by very visceral music. Or, late John Adams is a phenomenal example, something like Wagner that has so much attention to the surface that it ultimately kind of, I think gets to a deeper place somehow based on the execution.
There have been attempts, or maybe there's a whole spectrum between popular and classical music throughout the history. Can you help me understand maybe the difference between prog rock on one side of things and indie classical that comes at it from the other angle? Is this just, marketing speak for what happens anyway when people make music for an audience?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Lord knows that ever since one tribe in the diaspora walked with the instrument or bongo or whatever to another one, music has always been kind of cross-fertilized, and there's really no pure music. That said, I mean, sometimes the labels can be kind of helpful. I don't really understand. I think one of the things that is special to me about electronica is that a lot of times it doesn't have the vocal component that, say, progressive rock has or indie rock, which to me is the part that's generally most annoying. Like, oh my God, I got to deal with this vocalist, who's at the center of the mix and, is whiny or whatever. And electronica doesn't have that. I mean, I love the human voice, but I also love when you peel away the vocalist, you suddenly have rhythms, textures, harmonies. I mean, those are the things we deal with in classical music. And coming from a completely different space, that's what EDM has been dealing with.
And sometimes music is defined by the occasions on which it's presented and the spaces in which it's done, and and the drugs that you take when doing it.
Well, we are in San Francisco, so it's always good to allude to mind-altering experiences. What's interesting about electronic music is that I think it certainly has always had this relationship with psychedelia in a way, in the way that, say, certain kinds of rock have. But I don't think that's integral to the experience. I mean, a lot of this is so almost psychoacoustic the way it's mixed that it can have that kind of out-of-body experience, even if you're stone sober.
We are sitting here at the San Francisco Conservatory for Music. What did you learn from your teachers that you would like to pass on to the next generation? Any pearls of wisdom?
Well, John Corigliano imparted something that is fairly rare, which is that you should really think about your architecture. I mean, of course, everybody thinks about form, but generally form was taught to me as something that's a given. Okay, you've got this kind of form. Or it was a kind of a process-driven thing, like a serialism or a minimalism. John was very imaginative about saying, okay, what is this piece about? How is this kind of story going to be told? And then, it's so much harder than like connect the dots. I mean, you have to really engage a whole dialogue between your content and your form to really bring it to life. So for me, it's been important being a musician, playing piano. I think it's important to have your body being a part of your composing, but I do think it's important to get ahead of your 10 fingers. And so thinking about what you can do will ultimately bring you a greater variety of kind of experiences that you can create.
I've heard that stereo is king. What happened to quad?
I've become pretty traditional with the electronic components that I require. Because I find that the more speakers you have in a room, generally, the more chaotic the mix is. Stereo is what we are based on, in case anybody forgot. And especially when you get into large spaces, like symphonic spaces, you really need that clarity because it's going to bounce around the space. That said, I do have a piece that has 6-channel surround alternative energy. The idea of something spinning is kind of baked into the piece. Stereo is king. It does quite a lot of kind of antiphonal play with not only the electronic part, but with the musicians themselves. And I got kind of tired of showing up at different gigs and having people tell me, well, you sure you don't want to do this, quad, or do you want to have like 8 speakers around? It's like, no, stereo's king. Just do that. Get that right. Get me 2 good speakers, and we'll make great music.
And a great CD too. What's on that CD?
Well, it's a diverse collection of some of my work for smaller forces. Generally, people know that I'm a symphonic composer, and that's just true, but I certainly love the chamber setting. So you have Stereo's King, work for 3 percussionists and electronics. You have a piece, quite an old piece, called String Band for a prepared piano trio. So completely acoustic piece, but it does have an expanded kind of sound palette because of the preparations. There's a vocal work called Observer in the Magellanic Cloud that was for Chanticleer, and it kind of imagines a satellite observing this Maori tribe. There's a very new piece called Difficult Bamboo that is for pure ensemble and percussion. And there's a solo piano work called White Lies for Lomax, a kind of dreamy homage to the ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax, who found all these great blues musicians and had them record tunes for him.
Thanks for sharing your life, your music, and your Innova CD with YouTube.
Hey, great to be on this phenomenal label. It does a lot of important work, and can't wait for it to come out.